Hey guys, today we're talking about spontaneous combustion. Man, is spontaneous combustion a real thing? It's a really cool, interesting science question, cool chemistry question. I really like this one. All right, so let's talk about a couple of things. First, a combustion. What is combustion? Combustion is a chemical reaction and it involves fire. Actually, it involves a couple things. Hydrocarbons, which just means that it's like gasoline, right? It involves hydrocarbons, it involves oxygen, and we always get carbon dioxide and water. That's always what it kind of ends up. So when you have burn anything, you always get carbon dioxide and water out of it. That's kind of cool. Usually you don't notice you have water because it's a water vapor. Okay, so that's what a combustion is. It's a reaction, combustion reaction. And then the next word is spontaneous, right? What does spontaneous mean? Well, in the chemical world, spontaneous means happens kind of by itself. We typically have most reactions are not spontaneous when we have a chemical reaction, putting two things together, right? Usually what we have is we need activation energy to get a chemical reaction up and running. And let me give you a great example, right? Let's say I had a lighter, right? And I just push it down and I've got my hydrocarbon coming out, which is usually propane, or butane, butane coming out, and it kind of gets involved with the oxygen in the air, and then it catches fire. Well, only if I have some activation. That's that flint on there, right? That spark on there. And that's what actually catches fire. It needs some sort of activation. In a spontaneous reaction, it happens all by itself. So spontaneous versus activation energy in those things right there, right? Okay, so let me talk about spontaneous reactions. And those do happen, and they do cause combustion. Kind of an interesting deal. So most things, when we see spontaneous reactions actually catching fire, the reaction isn't actually starts up, just catches it right up on fire. What it usually involves like some sort of hydrocarbon, like an oil. Linseed oil is a great one. So take linseed oil, and it oxidizes in the air, and so it causes a spontaneous reaction with the oxidation. And what we call that is it cures or it dries. It's just kind of a funky term for it. And so what it is an exothermic reaction. If you remember that term, exothermic reaction, right? Just means that it gets hot. In fact, it can get really super hot. So hot that if you had things that burn, like rags or paper or cardboard, things like that, that could catch fire being really, really hot, then you get spontaneous combustion. And that's really kind of common for like oily rags. Oily rags happen all the time. They spontaneously combust. All right. And you know what? This happens, and I say a lot. I would say there are hundreds of house fires every year due to spontaneous combustion. And it's usually people painting or staining something using linseed oil. That's usually the culprit. Could be some other ones. You could use other hydrocarbons. And they ball up the rags, or they leave them in a kind of a pile, and then they end up, it's not as spontaneous like it happens like that. It takes usually several hours for it to happen. It gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter as it oxidizes, as that oxygen kind of, it basically cross-links with the polymer chain in there. And so anyway, it causes, and like I say, we see hundreds of house fires every year with that. All right, now let me push this to the next level, right? It's human spontaneous combustion. All right, I gotta tell you, when I was a kid, I heard about this. This was a thing. Like I don't know. Maybe there was a Pink Floyd album with somebody on spontaneous combustion, right? He was on fire or something. Maybe that was why. I don't know. But actually, it was more of a thing. It was talked about more than it is today. I don't hear too much about it. At least not in my circles. Maybe it's talked about in your circles. I don't know. So anyway, I want to talk about spontaneous human combustion. Okay? So spontaneous human combustion is when a human just goes up in flames, right? And so, and when they just go up in flames for no apparent reason, then kind of spontaneous combustion is kind of what's kind of said. I don't know if it's kind of pointed out or if it's actually blamed. So there's been a lot of scientific research on, could human spontaneous reaction really happen? You know, at this point, there has never been anybody that goes, yes, human spontaneous combustion is a real thing. And here's how it works. We have a lot of people who have died and they caught on fire and nothing else has caught on fire, which the surroundings hasn't caught on fire. You're like, what? How does that happen? People have actually died from catching on fire, and it didn't look like there was an external spark or anything that actually got them. And so they called it human spontaneous combustion, or spontaneous human combustion, however you want to look at it. And so anyway, it's been looked into over and over and over because it's happened, several times throughout history. And when I say history, going back, let's say, a couple hundred years, we've kind of looked at this and we've seen this out. And a lot of times we can't quite put our finger on what it is that exactly happened. But a lot of times there are clues elsewhere that have kind of said, well, maybe it was XYZ, right? And so a lot of times we think that maybe like a spark from a cigarette, somebody is sleeping and the spark, maybe the end of their lit cigarette has fallen on their clothes and caught fire. And maybe they were, maybe they were under an influence of alcohol, or maybe they were really, really sleepy and didn't notice they were on fire. I don't know. But, something like that happens, and then they burn, and there's nothing else around, right? The spontaneous, or the cigarette's gone, so they didn't, there's no evidence of a cigarette. And so that could be a kind of a plausible idea. We've kind of come up with a couple of scenarios where we just didn't know that spontaneous human combustion was one of the things that was kind of said, but we knew that they were smokers or something like that, right? The other could be that maybe a spark, maybe an ember from a fireplace. And that's happened a couple of times where people are maybe asleep and nearby a fireplace, and they're maybe they caught their hair on fire and they didn't wake up, but they couldn't wake up, or whatever. I don't know exactly. So there's always been kind of a rationale behind it. So nobody's ever really said, yep, spontaneous human combustion, it's a thing. All right. So I hope that, if you've ever heard of this and you were like, oh no, another way that I could die, it's probably not going to happen. I feel safe that spontaneous human combustion is not going to happen to any of us. So, all right. So that was it for today. Hey, I'll talk to you guys soon.